Okay, so yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the low poly, getting your low poly, high poly into ZBrush. And let me just take a look here. So yeah, sometimes it can be kind of a little bit confusing when you're dealing with a low poly mesh, especially when there's multiple subtools. So in this case, the tools were merged. I find this a little bit safer to do in low res. And if you've noticed, I think this thing already has its UVs, right? If I'm not mistaken. UV master, I'm going to say use existing, flatten. Yeah, so these have already been kind of unwrapped. So usually the way I like to think of this, and you can sort of see I've got a color coding on here, right? And I'll show you how to do this from scratch. I'm not sure if there's a texture map in here. Yeah, I'll just turn it off. So if I hit Shift F, you see there's two polygroups. So in this case, this couch is one whole material, or one sort of surface that's all the same, I would say, right? So if you know this is going to be one surface, and this is in the case of, let's say, an object with multiple subtools, and all the subtools share one UV space. So again, as I mentioned, if you take a look at this, and if I flatten this, like the metal bars on the bottom, right, are in this space here, and then the rest is the couch. So you can think of like complex models where there might be like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 subtools originally. You kind of want to treat them, in this assignment at least, we're treating it as one UV shell. So you can export them all to Maya. You can do your, what's it called? UV master, right? Polygroups unwrap when you've got the polygroups. But you can create polygroups for different purposes, okay? So I'll just go back and unflatten this. So what I did in this case is I basically isolated the chair and gave it its own polygroup, okay? And then I did the same thing here with these parts and basically gave them their own polygroup. The reason being is that I want to basically create what's called an ID map, and an ID map gives you a different color for different areas. So if you know that bottom part's metal and the other part's fabric, like the main bulk of the chair is fabric or leather, right? That'll be one polygroup. So if there were other parts of this couch, like maybe the cushions, let's say, were actually a different material, and maybe this is like leather here, and then fabric out here. So in that situation, I would sort of say, okay, well, let's maybe I'll try maybe just like group by normals, right? That actually works out perfectly. So I would say, okay, this is going to be like one polygroup. This will be another polygroup, right? Let me just kind of change that so it's a fairly different color, right? So you could sort of basically create polygroups based on different material types. Now, to actually generate the, you need basically a texture map, okay, for this to work. And so this is a little bit weird, but what we have to do, like ZBrush, you can paint on a model in ZBrush, okay? So just to show you, if I kind of go in here and paint red, if you notice, it's like very splotchy, and that's because right now I'm painting not directly on the UVs, but actually directly on mesh. So each vertex is acting like a point that's representing color, okay? So in order to kind of create a clean, what I call color ID map, or yeah, basically an ID texture map, what you want to do first is divide this thing a few times. So I would probably divide it up to at least 1 million polys. In this case, I'm hitting 2 million. I'm going to go to poly groups on the right side. Okay. So poly groups, and then, sorry. Yeah, is it poly groups or poly paint? I think it's actually poly paint. And I'll say poly paint from poly groups. So if I click on that, all of a sudden, right, that blue group becomes filled with a blue color now on the surface. So if I paint on this now, you'll see, right, I can paint texture on here. But the idea is I don't want to paint any extra texture. The idea is to show you, okay, we're going to have a color filling this. The reason I don't do it at low res, and I want to show you, is that if I do poly paint from poly groups, it can get kind of splotchy sometimes if you have a gap somewhere. So, yeah, it's hard to show, but basically, like, you get really messy edges and stuff, and it gets really messy. So that's why I suggest dividing it up a fair bit to do this. You basically go poly paint, polygroups from poly paint, then you go to texture map, and you say Create, new from Polypaint. Before I do this though, I will go to UV map and make sure I'm set to 4K, 16 pixel border, okay? So I'll say new from Polypaint, and you'll see this will update, right? Now with that color coding, so what I'm going to do next is clone the texture, which again, it's a bit of a weird way to do it, but you clone the texture, it pops it up into the texture palette up here. Zbrush is again weird. Compared to every other software, its UVs are upside down. I'm not sure why, but you want to select the texture, go to flip vertical, and then hit export. In this case, just a JPEG is fine, so we can kind of give it a basic name like, sorry, let me just find my folder. Yeah, I'll just say ID map. Okay. It'll pop up if you're saving JPEG or anything with like compression options, it'll pop up this like window. You basically just have to say okay to it. And that's it, okay? So the next step is I would just go back down to my low res. I still have my UVs, right? So I'm going to go to Z plugin. Z plugin, sorry, I want to go to FBX exports, imports. In this case, I don't need any options on for this. Smooth normals you would leave on unless your object has to have hard edges, in which case you would turn it off. 9 times out of 10 I kind of just leave it on. It seems to work fine. I don't need to embed maps either, so I can just go with selected. It's one subtool. If you had multiple subtools in low poly, what you would do is go to in your tool palette, basically make sure you go to all low and then say merge visible, and it would create a new separate tool in the tool palette that you could kind of jump to and do all that work with. But okay, so I'll go to Z plugin. Yes, exports. Okay. Put in the low poly. Yes. And I'll show you how this kind of connects with Substance, okay? Okay, so I'm going to go to File, New. Yeah, make sure Import Cameras Auto Unwrap is off. I'm not using UV Tile Workflow, which is that UDIM process I was talking about. I usually max out my document resolution, which is basically your workspace. You don't have to do that. Oops, let me just make sure I'm in the right folder here. Grabbing the wrong low poly. Okay, so I'll open this. Okay, we got the couch there. I'll go to my texture set, and then I'll scroll down to Bake Mesh Maps. And again, I'll set my res, in this case, to 4K. Apply diffusion with 16 pixels. Click on the sort of icon for the high poly to load the high poly. Again, if you needed to tweak the distances between the two, you can. Hopefully I don't need to do too much. It's one of the reasons I will do the project all before exporting, is to make sure the two occupy roughly the same space. The way this sort of baking thing works, it's actually like a lighting calculation. So it's almost like it lights one object and the other, and then compares the distances between the two. And that's how it gets both a displacement, which can literally recreate that mesh at render time, meaning it divides the mesh up from whatever, let's say it's 10,000, it'll go up to like 1,000,000. And then it pushes that detail in or out to recreate it at render time, which is usually what we do in high-end film and TV. There, so you know, if there's a little bit of red, you just typically want to expand the frontal distance just so that that kind of pops out. Expanding it too much though can cause other problems, where let's say, you know, you might see part of this backing piece appear on the cushion. You know, it might get confused because it's like, well, what surface am I trying to like capture detail from? Okay. Usually not a huge issue these days. The baking software is a lot smarter. Yeah, so what I'm going to do too is like under ID, I'm just going to let it bake the color map here, and I'll show you why that ID matters in a moment. Okay, so it's going to go through its process. I'll just pause while it does it. Okay, so I've done the bake, so we got all that stuff out. Okay, the main thing here, the ID map, right? So I don't have an ID because I didn't kind of bring anything over with it. So what you want to do is go into your assets, and at the bottom of the asset window is a little plus sign. You click on the plus sign. I'm going to add a resource. And yes, it's this one here, the ID map. I'm going to open that. And instead of leaving it undefined, it's ideal to kind of say, is it an alpha, a color, lookup, I think it's called, an environment, which is basically like your HDR, or a texture. So I'm going to just say texture import. Okay. Now, if you scrub down, I should be able to see this in my texture palette. Where is it? Oh, there. ID map. I'm going to left click and drag it over in here and drop it into ID map. Okay. So what's cool about this now, let's say I go into grab a material. Let me just clear that. So let's say I'm looking for leather. Right. I'll drag some leather on here. One of the problems is it drops it on everything, including those bars, right? So if I go back over to my layers, and I would recommend to maybe creating a folder for this so you start organizing right away. So I'll drop this in. I don't really need this paint layer I have, so I can basically just cut that layer. But I'll call this, just call it leather or chair. Now what's cool about this is if you right click and then say, I'm going to, so I'm going to add a mask first. That's what I should do. Add mask with color selection. Okay. So with that folder selected, I'm going to say add mask with color selection. Then you go to the color picker and now it'll pop over to this color map. And then you literally just eyedrop it. And so now what you're doing, right, is preserving the leather on just the leather portions, right, that should receive that texture. Okay. So that's the same thing. Let's say I'll just close the folder up for now. I'll create a new one here. I don't know, just type in metal under the smart materials. And yeah, let's say we go this like kind of cool dark cobalt. I'll drag it on, drop it on. Again, it's going to overlap on everything. So I'm going to just create a folder with that. I'll call this the legs for now. Okay. And then again, I'll add a mask with color selection. And this time I'll do the color picker and pick the other polygroup. So now, yes, that should, I don't know if it's popping up correctly. Let's try again. There we go. All right, so now that's only applying that metal effect to that one object.